It's all perspective.
Hmm.
There is no such thing as failure if you learn from it, and you learn from, okay, this isn't going to work next time. Okay, this is a very valuable tool. This is something that I can build upon. This is something that's going to make my presentation next time better. I never, ever, either personally or professionally, or, certainly with On a Flight, look at any situation where, oh, that was a failure. Because if you look at it purely from a win-loss scenario, then yeah, it's truly a failure. But if you can learn from it, it's not a failure.
From cave drawings to family histories to stories around the fire, humans crave order among chaos, connection amid isolation. So we tell stories. Our mission at the Storytellers Network is to bring the art of story to the masses. Whether you're in marketing, you're an entrepreneur, or you're developing your own personal brand, telling your story effectively can make the difference between celebrating milestones and collecting unemployment. The Storytellers Network strives to help storytellers tell their stories so you can learn from the best. Now, your host, the inbound evangelist himself, Dan Moyle.
Welcome to the Storytellers Network podcast. I'm your host, Dan Moyle. I believe in the power of story. From personal connections to business, storytelling is what separates us from all other life on earth. It connects us. And we're about to dive into yet another great story with a fantastic storyteller. Now, before we do, a quick reminder that our website has great resources available, past episodes, and contact information for me. Visit thestorytellersnetwork.com for that. And if you're new and just testing the waters, be sure to text Storytellers to 31996 in order to subscribe to the show and hear more great stories. Now, today's guest is inspirational to me. So he may not be a professional motivational speaker per se, but he has motivated thousands of people to mobilize and serve on an amazing mission. This guy today on the show co-founded an organization that serves veterans in their later years, starting first with World War II vets, moving on to Korean War veterans and Vietnam vets as well. It's called the On a Flight Network, and it's made up of more than 100 local hubs, all because Earl Morse saw a need and convinced a few other pilots to begin flying veterans to Washington, D.C. to see the memorial built in their honor at no cost at all to the vets. An absolutely incredible story. And since May 21 of 2005, thousands of veterans have taken their honor flight from all over the country. Earl Morse tells a great story, has heard many, many more. So today, you get to hear from inspirational storyteller Earl Morse. Let's get to that story. Earl, thanks for joining me today on the Storytellers Network. I want to start with asking the question, because to me this season, my past 4 seasons, most people have been storytellers professionally in some way. This season is a little bit different. I'm talking to inspirational storytellers. So I want to ask you, the first question is, do you consider yourself a storyteller, Earl?
That's not at the top of my resume list. It seems like through happenstance, I have developed some skills along the way, and looking at how this nation now is piggybacked on this idea, I guess I do have some skills in that regard.
Right. Do you think that story has helped move the needle for honor flight?
Oh, without question. Without question. You really don't grasp people at an emotional level without telling the story. It's one of the things that I've discovered is if someone gets up and they start telling the facts about honor flight, and we've taken X amount of people from point A to point B, that's one thing. But then if somebody gets up and they tell a personal story about how their dad went on an honor flight or their mom went on an honor flight trip, and the story that's behind that and the change in their life that is a direct consequence of them participating with us, that's much more gripping than any statistical information.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember hearing you talk at one point about the fact that you could sit there and say, at the time we were losing almost 1,000 World War II veterans per day. But that doesn't really tell the story until just what you said, Earl, is But when you talk about a grandpa or a grandma or a dad or a mom or somebody who went and has never opened up, and all of a sudden, they got tears in their eyes, and the community, like that, like there's not a dry eye in the house. So the 1,000 per day that we were losing at the time is a huge thing, and it kind of makes you stop. But then the story is what moves you. You have to have heard some amazing stories. What's the most powerful kind of story that you hear out there about this?
The impact that going on the on-flight trip has meant to somebody and their families, Dan. Early in the program, we'd been at it for about 2 or 3 years, and there was this daughter. She'd come to an open house that we have at the end of the year. It's kind of like a little recognition event, and she brought in all these family portraits. And she took me aside. She laid out these family portraits, and she said, "Do you notice anything unusual about this?" And there were pictures of, like Owen Mills, Sears Portrait Studio, pictures going all the way back, and then pictures from his on-a-flight trip, and then family portraits after that. And she goes, "Do you notice anything different here in the photographs?" I said, "No, beautiful family. It got bigger over the years." She goes, "Look at my dad's face." She said, "My dad never smiled. He went on the on-a-flight trip, and now look at these family portraits. Dad was smiling. He had passed away 6 months ago," but she goes, "You introduced me to a father I didn't know that I even had." And it's the gut level impact that has on us and all of us within On a Flight and all the leaders. That's the story that when you convey that, there's some light bulbs that go on around the room when they hear about what this means to everyone.
Mm. Absolutely. And you've been involved in other things over the years, but Honor Flight is the main focus. Do you think that kind of storytelling, do you think other nonprofits and other organizations can use that to their advantage? I mean, they have to, right?
Certainly. Certainly to a degree when you impact people at the gut level, but Honor Flight strikes such a deep emotional chord because not only are you conveying an effort that shows reverence, respect, love, but also patriotism that was lost. I mean, I think most Americans can remember a time prior to 9/11 when patriotism wasn't that big of a deal. I can remember the years just past Vietnam. Vietnam War ended in 75, and from 75 through the 80s, I mean, patriotism wasn't anything that really struck a chord with people. Well, it's striking a chord with people now, and I think that Honor Flight is riding that wave. I think it's a part of the wave as well.
And do you think that those stories that we tell through that, the impact, the connections, the familial connections, does that overcome things like political differences and stuff?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Honor Flight knows no political allegiance with anyone. And if you look back in World War II, who were some of the most notable figures that you can imagine? You think of Roosevelt, who led the United States into World War II. You think about John F. Kennedy, who was a U-boat commander. PT boat commander, and the wounds that he suffered throughout his life. Truman, who dropped the bomb and ended World War II. So, I mean, this effort is Democratic, Republican, but then at the end of the day, all those differences, all those walls melt away because it's America, and it's Americans at the end of the day that really resonates with everyone across all party lines.
Yeah, absolutely. And it humanizes us, right? Rather than labels divide us and make these things up, but these stories humanize others, and we're able to connect on this deep level. And it all goes away. I mean, when I was involved with Honor Flight myself at a local hub, it was Republicans, Democrats, any ethnicity, any economic background, we all came together, and that patriotism came through. And it wasn't a patriotism of we're better than anybody. It was just a patriotism of we're all connected by something. And that's just, yeah. And I think story.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you love about storytelling? If you weren't a storyteller like professionally over the years, but now you do use story to help do this mission, what is it? What do you get out of it as a human when you're using stories like that?
Connecting with people on such an emotional level. I mean, of course, you have all these sports fans everywhere, and everybody connects around sports allegiances like that. But this is at such another level. If looking back at World War II and what was accomplished, what we asked our men and women to accomplish, they collectively and literally saved the world. All of Europe is free. All of the Pacific is free. And America is free for a reason. It just didn't happen. There were people that literally fought and made that happen. And because of their efforts, everybody today gets to go vote. Everybody today gets to go to church or not go to church. Everybody can assemble, a freedom of speech. I mean, what we're doing right now, anything that we want to say, we can say. Those blessings and those freedoms came at a very high cost. And the people who paid that price, or the people that watched their friends pay the ultimate price, they're in our community still to this day. And for us to rally around as Americans and get behind them and give them this one last moment in the sun is something that every American can get behind.
And it all kind of starts with that story, getting people involved, right?
Oh, yeah. You just make them aware of what we're doing and the impact that it has on people. You've got to tell a story.
That can be very powerful as a storyteller, to get that feedback and see that difference made. That can be, I can see why that's something that you love about storytelling. What do you find as a challenge in storytelling when you're doing that? What kind of challenges do you face in that?
It's a good point, because until such times as you have grasped them on an emotional level, they don't care about your story. So quite often you have to lead with that. Attention span is one thing. If you don't, whoever it is, any audience that I'm talking to, if you don't grasp them quickly, then there's just way too many distractions. Nowadays, you walk in and you tell a story, and you're likely to have, depending upon the demographic, you're likely to have half people there on their cell phones, going through Facebook, and maybe they'll glance up at you. But you've got to be able to convey a sense of purpose, a sense of urgency really pretty quick in any discussions that you're going to have and any storytelling that you're going to do.
And how do you kind of do that then? I mean, as somebody who, like you said it earlier on, you don't consider yourself a storyteller, but you've learned some things. How do you overcome that challenge then?
Oh, that's a good point. We've known each other for quite a few years, Dan, and one of the things that I kind of have going for me that never did serve me well in school, I've got a big mouth. I'm kind of a tall guy. They say, well, we'd like to introduce our next speaker, and here we have so-and-so, and someone gets up there in a monotone voice. I use all those things that were a curse when I was a kid growing up, and I just come right out with it, and and I'm kind of boisterous and bolsterous when I first get up there. And it's at that moment that you've got to, the second that you have their attention, you've got to drive a point home that strikes them at an emotional level. Once you have their attention, then you can go on. It's funny because when I first started going around, the local area, and I would drive to a VFW post. I'd get off work at 5 o'clock and drive to a VFW post, and there's 30, 40 people sitting there, and I'd start talking, and I said, well, yeah, we're gonna have to wrap this up. You only have about 5 minutes. We've got other things on our agenda, and I'd try to get their attention, and it wasn't very successful, at least not initially. And I'd say, okay, fine. Do you have a PC projector? Do you have a laptop? And they said, well, no. Well, I'll bring my own. And get up there for the meeting. And before I'd say anything, they'd say, you got 5 minutes. I'd show a video, or I'd show some footage of a trip, a very moving, powerful moment, where there's a World War II veteran with or without me, whatever was the most gripping. And I'd show that for 5 minutes. I wouldn't even say anything. They say, you got 5 minutes. I'd show them that. And then I'd say, thank you very much for giving me that 5 minutes. Well, hang on for just a minute. We want to hear more about this. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and extend our meeting a little bit. What else can you tell us about, whatever this is? And, yeah, that was a lesson that I learned within the first year of going and giving presentation. You gotta grip them pretty quick, pretty early, or they don't really care.
Right, and when you grip them like that, they invite you back. Now you've got an open forum. That's powerful, right?
Exactly. Oh yeah. And then we're going to extend the meeting for this cause, for this effort, for this individual. Yeah, and I enjoy that, but that was a hard lesson to learn.
Yeah, bring in the emotion, the passion, the personality to a presentation. That's kind of what I hear you saying.
And quickly,
quickly, and also, and I don't know if this is my thought or what I see you doing or whatever, but what comes to mind though is kind of this word, or kind of this picture of you going out, Earl, and to the community, and instead of walking around with your hand out and up like you're asking for money, I picture you going out with your hand out like a handshake and just bringing people in. Is that on purpose?
My background, having served 21 years in the military, there's a camaraderie there especially when I speak to veterans groups. My dad was in the military for 20 years, so until I was about 41, 42 years old, that was all I knew. So when I get up in front of fraternal organizations or veterans groups, there is that instant camaraderie, and that's something that I feed upon because I love it. I love this population of people. But then as the years have gone by, I've also noticed that other people love veterans. And when you have in that room, you have their sons, their daughters, their grandsons, their granddaughters that think just as much of that veteran as I do, if not more. Then if you can draw that out in a presentation, that's powerful. You're going to have their attention. And Dan, I want to share one of the things with you that this is something that I've been speaking to here lately, because we are losing so many veterans, especially our World War II veterans. But if something that I've discovered that kind of unifies everybody in the room behind this common cause is a discussion that I had with a veteran. And he was actually with Patton during World War II, and they invaded North Africa, and then they went to Sicily, and then they went up to Italy. They were fighting their way across Europe. Then they were going into Switzerland and the Netherlands, and in pursuit of Hitler. This guy, Dan, was on the front lines for like 2.5 years. And I asked him, I said, wow, I mean, getting up every day and you're on the front lines. I said, I'm just kind of curious, what motivated you? I said, I've heard a lot of people who are fighting, and they say, well, I was fighting for my buddy on either side of me. That's what got me up every morning. That's what got me fighting. I said, was that true for you? He said, no, I wasn't fighting for my buddy. He goes, my buddies were dead. Oh. And he said, I had replacements on either side of me. In fact, I had replacements on top of replacements on either side of me. I wasn't fighting for my buddy. I said, well, what were you fighting for? He said, I was fighting for my wife, that I hadn't met yet. And I was fighting for my kids and my grandkids and my great-grandkids that weren't conceived yet. And I look to the audience and I tell them, you people are the grandsons, the great-grandsons, the granddaughters of these veterans that were fighting for you before you were conceived. I said, that's what got them up every day, and that's what brought them home. So you got to tell that story. That unifies everybody in the room, and that's one of the many reasons why I believe Honor Flight's been so successful.
You're not supposed to make me cry on these things, man.
Man. No, Dan.
That was awesome.
Nobody cries on Honor Flight. You know that.
That's
Our
right.
Allergies
it's
flare
allergies.
up. Our allergies flare up, but nobody cries. No.
And it's true, Earl. It's so gripping. You know, my 4.5 years of helping to run a local hub, every time I spoke, that welling would come up in my chest because we were sharing such amazing stories of amazing people. And, you know, the thing is, again, going back to like politics, right? Like it crosses those lines. Nobody's perfect, right? These, you know, these old men and old women, affectionately said, they're not perfect. War is never fun. War is hell, right? But at the end of the day, they were doing it back then for us. And they're just such amazing people. And that, man, my gosh, yeah. I could never get through a presentation without choking up in some way.
No. And the other thing, too, is I've had veterans. This is earlier in the program. I had a veteran call up to cancel. And this is like 48 hours before the Honor Flight trip. Well, early in the program, airlines weren't that generous to us. You know, we were just another nonprofit organization. So this guy's going to cancel 48 hours before the flight. And I said, sir, this is going to cost us money. We can't just put another veteran in the seat. I said, do you need a wheelchair? Do you have leg problems? I said, we'll get you a wheelchair. No, that's not it. And I said, well, how about, do you have a breathing problem? Because we'll bring oxygen, you know. No, that's not it at all. I said, sir, would you please tell me why you're not going to be able to go? And he said, I'm afraid I'll go and I'll start crying, and I won't be able to stop crying. And I told him, I said, and I laughed at him. And people hear that and they go, you laughed at it. I said, I laughed at him because it's like everyone cries on an Honor Flight trip. I told him, I said, listen, you go on an Honor Flight trip. If you don't cry, you're going to be the only person on the entire trip in the airport that's not crying. I said, everybody cries. So, except for me and you, because it's just allergies that flare up every once in a while. Yeah,
that's right. That's funny. So I want to go back to that first Honor Flight. I got to believe the story played a part in this, but I want to ask this: how in the world did you convince a group of guys, your friends, to give up their planes, to donate the cost of fuel, their day, to do this thing? Was it story? Was it relationships? How did you convince these guys like Joe Oram, who I know now, and like he's a good guy, don't get me wrong, but I mean, we're all busy. Yeah. This costs money. How did you convince these friends to go all in with you?
Well, that's a good question. There's a lot of selfish motivation behind that on the part of every pilot, but that's not the key factor. Let me explain. If you're a private pilot, you love adventures. You love going to different areas. In fact, there's a book that's out there. It's called The $100 Hamburger. And as a pilot, everybody knows about it. Basically, it's a listing of great restaurants that you can fly out to, you know, and they rate the restaurants that are close to the airport, and then you fly back. So pilots in general are looking for a good reason to get in their plane and spend a lot of money to go from point A to point B. Out at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, we had the largest aero club in the nation, and it was a military aero club. So I'm talking to a room full of people that they're there today because they stand on the shoulders of our former military. That we have the greatest Air Force, the greatest Army, the greatest Navy, Marine, Coast Guard people units in the world, and that's because of our predecessors. And when I got up to speak at the Aero Club meeting, and I said, this is what I would like to do. I said, right now I'm at a VA clinic in Springfield, Ohio. I've been taking care of these same veterans for the past 7 years. And now they finally have a memorial. And I've asked all 300 of my veterans, have you been to your memorial? Because frankly, I was kind of curious. I'd never been to the memorial. I've seen some pictures of it. I wanted to know what their experience was like going out there. And none of them. I mean, the memorial was dedicated in May because they're my patients. I see them every 3-6 months. So now we're into winter. We're into December, January. And I'd seen them all back. And I'd say, what was your memorial like? Have you seen it? And not one of them had been. And I said, are you going to go? Do you have any plans? And none of them, they realized then that they weren't going to be richer next year. They weren't going to have more funding. Their kids or grandkids weren't going to have more time the following year. They were never going to see their memorial. So when I went up and spoke before the Aero Club, I said, I've got about 300 veterans that they're never going to see their memorial. And if you want to make this happen this summer, 2 rules. Rule number 1, the World War II veterans, they're not to pay a penny. You guys and gals are going to pay the entire aircraft rental fee, because the veterans that I see, their life savings are gone. Their houses are gone. They live in an apartment. And each month they have to decide, well, do I eat or do I take my prescriptions? And that was usually the emphasis, the driving factor that brought them out to the VA. I said, you're going to pay the entire aircraft rental fee, number 1. Number 2, I will teach you how to take care of these 80 and these 90-year-old men and women. I said, you can't fly out to Washington, D.C. and then go hang out with your fellow military buddies that are stationed out there. I said, your sole purpose is to take excellent care of these veterans and then bring them home. That really struck a chord with these pilots. And I had 11 pilots who'd never met any of my patients who stepped forward and said, yeah, put my name down. I want to make this happen. So, no, it was never an issue of having to get aggressive in a recruiting strategy for these wonderful patriotic men and women who themselves served in the military and served on the shoulders of the people who we were targeting with our honor flight trips.
Yeah. So it comes down, I think about the marketing side of things, storytelling, this kind of thing. And what it comes down to me is 3 words: know your audience, right? Like you had this mission, and instead of going to just random people on the street and saying, hey, you want to do this? No, I'm too busy.
Yeah.
You knew who to go after. So that's important. Know your
that would have never worked. Yeah.
Right. So something you mentioned earlier that I want to go back to that made me think about this. You talked about being in a room, giving a presentation, and half the people are on Facebook.
Yeah.
How do you think social media is affecting the craft of storytelling and how we tell our stories? Do you see it as a positive, a negative, or what is it for you for social media?
I think it's a positive if you know how to utilize it. Mm-hmm. You're right. It's so many, you talk about the Reader's Digest version of a story, or whatever the story is. I used to enjoy reading Reader's Digest because you could digest a lot of information, through about 4 or 5 pages. It was great without having to read the entire book of whatever the topic was. Well, in 2018, 2019, and in the foreseeable future, it's almost now being condensed down to a snapshot. As you're thumbing through, Facebook or Twitter or whatever, you got to grip people pretty early. And if you're skilled at it, if you know what you're doing, if you develop a following, then it's a lot easier. I don't think that it as a social medium. I don't believe it's a detriment to storytelling, because once you attract people, then they're more interested about what it is that you're doing. And then they will go to your website. They'll go to your link. And then they go ahead and then read more. But yeah, you really need to grab people early, and whatever means that is, and it's usually a photograph or a very short video. If you're skilled at it, it's a tremendous tool.
So you see it as kind of a way to lead them back to your home base, your website, then, as far as like businesses or whatever go, then, huh?
Right. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. People who, for whatever reason, they're just thumbing through their Facebook, their Twitter account, and they come across a gripping picture. I'm the same way, and you're probably the same way as well. You know, you look at that, this is interesting. You click on it, and then you follow it at your convenience and at your level of interest. And I think with each peeling of the onion, so to speak, if it continues to draw you in, well, then you've done a very good marketing campaign. You've reached an audience that now is behind you.
Absolutely. And do you see? I got to imagine, as the founder of the Honor Flight Idea, co-founder of the Honor Flight Network, you probably are connected to a lot of local hubs. There's like 150 across the country, or whatever it is now. Do you see those hubs using social media to tell stories well? Do you have one that you've seen that you're like, oh my gosh, that's an amazing one right there? Do you have any examples of that?
Just about all of them. Well, I mean, there's some that they're not as active as others. Some of the hubs that stand out, I would have to say, would be On Flight Chicago. They do a great job. Also, Stars and Stripes does a wonderful job. But again, it kind of depends on what the picture is. So many people across the country that are associated with Honor Flight, that kind of becomes a bit of a precedence. If you're looking at bringing on board members, if you're looking at developing a program, you've got to bring in somebody with a king's PR sense that can get that word out. And the younger people that are more akin and then get their information off of Facebook and Twitter accounts and social media similar to that, you want to bring them on your board. You know, you want them to be able to get your word out to that group of people. I think newspaper, print media, when I first started Honor Flight, that was pretty big. If you had a story on the front page of your local newspaper, that generated a lot of interest, a lot of attention. That's not where I see the future going.
Do you think that those newspapers, instead of being on the front page of the newspaper, are you still seeing them have power within the digital world, though?
Yes,
Yeah.
especially with subsequent generation. I mean, the Vietnam veterans, the Korean veterans, and those surviving World War II veterans, that's where they get a lot of their information from. It's interesting where a lot of our applications come from. Quite often, they're much more likely to come from the grandson or the granddaughter of a World War II Korean or even Vietnam veteran. But if you want to tell a story and if you want to go after that demographic to make them aware of this program, to include in the print media, this is how you fill out an application, and this is how we get you from point A to point B. The beneficiaries of our program get a lot from newsprint media, but we get a lot more support, a lot more applications actually come from next generation family members who have been drawn into our efforts and then take full advantage of the technology nowadays.
Absolutely. And it's funny because you mentioned the younger folks, and absolutely agree. Younger generations, Gen X, millennial, and younger, are very adept typically at the digital world. But I see guys like our mutual friend Stephen Brown, who is not a spring chicken, has been around the block. But my goodness, that man is just phenomenal on social media, on Instagram and on Facebook, both, because he does share those stories and those photos. And of course, man, it's hard not to love a photo where you've got, somebody like Teresa dancing with a World War II veteran, or one of the Parks guys, or whatever. So, I mean, it kind of lends itself to it. But yeah, even the older generations. I mean, I don't mean to call Stephen old. Stephen, if you're listening, I'm sorry, you're not old. But those more experienced generations can still use these tools and learn from them, and it's incredible, isn't it? It's such a cool time to be alive.
Oh yeah. And to Stephen Brown's credit, nobody takes photographs like he does. I mean, they're gripping, and that really lends itself to the media, to the social media out there. If you pop on a gripping photograph, it's like, oh, this is cool. And yeah, and Stephen Brown is very good at, of course, not just being a photographer, but taking full advantage of today's way of getting the word out.
Mm-hmm. And telling a story through those. It's awesome. It's incredible. I
Oh,
admire
yeah.
him. Such a cool guy.
So
I look at what you do in life as someone who's kind of like made it, right? And not that, you're, I don't know, Oprah or somebody like that, but like you get to live the life that you want to, right? You moved to Maine because you love the area. You get to fly, go get your $100 burger.
yeah.
Do you kind of look around and think that yourself? Like, at what point in your life have you kind of gone, man, I'm pretty blessed, or is that a daily ritual for you to be grateful?
Kind of a mixed bag. I do have obstacles that I'm still trying to overcome in regards to On a Flight. I'm the On a Flight, the essence of the On a Flight program itself, getting veterans to their memorial and then getting them back. Having done that for 13 years is very powerful, very, very moving, and I'm glad for the role that I've played in that. But now, as a healthcare provider, working at a clinic taking care of veterans, I see the ravages, the scars of post-traumatic stress disorder. And I am now going to focus more of my attention on the therapeutic aspects of an On a Flight trip, and what this could mean, and what this often does mean to veterans who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. And there's concern. There's and justifiably so. Veterans with PTSD, I think they get a horrible rap in the press. If there's something on the national news about a veteran with PTSD, normally it involves a shooting, somebody dying, and we have yet again another tragic story linked to PTSD. But in my daily activities, the 99.9% of the veterans that I see, that I have the privilege of treating, that suffer from PTSD, they're nowhere near that point in their lives. They suffer. They do not socialize that much because of the traumas that they've experienced. And I personally believe that I could do a better job reaching out to this group of individuals, and that's my motivation in moving forward. But yeah, those obstacles are a frustration, and I get upset from time to time. But just last night, I was sitting there, I was thinking about the successes and the failures that I've had, and you're right. I look back on everything that's been accomplished in my lifestyles. I have a lot to be grateful for. To sit back and rest on that, and to relax on that, is I don't think it's in my makeup to just count my blessings only and say, okay, it is finished. My job here is done. Yeah, that's personally, that's pretty much where I'm at right now. I'm grateful for the successes, but I believe in my heart that I can do more. I believe in my heart that we all could do more for veterans with PTSD.
Mm-hmm. There's more work to be done. Absolutely.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. What part? So I don't even know if this can necessarily go anywhere, but I'm very curious to know your thoughts. I see story and connection and humanizing is a very powerful thing. What part do you think story plays in that world of helping veterans or anybody with PTSD? Can story help with the healing, or is story more how to tell their stories in order to get them help? Like, what part does that play, do you think?
I think stories, from where I sit right now, involve getting them more help. You would never go up to a veteran with PTSD and say, tell me your story. Why is it that you don't come out of the house? Why? I'm really curious as to what were the traumas that brought you to this point. So stories play a key role in getting veterans help. One of the worst phone calls that I've had to make this week, I had to call this wife and give her my condolences because of the recent passing of her husband. And he's a Navy corpsman in Vietnam. He'd done one tour in Vietnam, but it was a horrific tour. He was at Khe Sanh in 1968. Khe Sanh was an embattled runway isolated strip that was under constant attack for 3-4 months, and they were occasionally the enemy would be in the perimeter and they'd repel the attack, and they were under constant attack all the time. He brought those physical and psychological wounds home with him. He struggled with alcoholism and alcohol dependence for years and years and years. And I met him about 2 years ago. Well, he's a Navy corpsman. Every single physician assistant in this country owe their existence to Navy corpsmen. In 1963, the very first PA program, there was only 4 individuals that had signed up for that, and they were at Duke University. All 4 of them were Navy corpsmen who had seen battle in Vietnam. And these people were doing incredible things. They weren't doctors, but they were doing appendectomies, they were doing amputations, they were treating some horrific wounds in the field. And President Kennedy said, there's got to be something between nurses and doctors, and that was the genesis of the PA program. I had 2 years with this veteran who was my predecessor in so many ways, and he was my hero. And when he would be successful and he was sober, and his wife and his daughters would come in, he had 3 daughters, and they were just so proud of him, so beaming. And I was so proud just to be in his presence, and I encouraged him as much as I could. But in the end, his demons overcame him, and he succumbed. So I had to make that phone call yesterday, Friday, to the wife. And I just believe in my heart of hearts, were this person eligible, available, if the program of Honor Flight was now geared towards giving these veterans a trip, and in the right circumstance. And there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes in order to make this happen for them without triggering any problems. I can't help but think perhaps he would have been helped. I just will never know. And sometimes I just get too close to the situations and to the veterans and to their families to then step back from that and then approach Honor Flight and say, and when I say Honor Flight, I'm talking local, national, and say, this is what we need to do. and everybody needs to get on board with this, and this is how we're going to do it. And it's like, whoa, pump the brakes there, Earl. we kind of have our hands full right now. So, yeah, that's a frustration. But as a storyteller, I can see that's what's going to work. At least that's what I hope is going to work, because you're not going to get the stories from the veterans themselves. You may get it from the families as this program evolves, but you don't even ask a veteran suffering from PTSD, hey, what happened?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sorry you lost your friend. Thank you for being there for him. That's a powerful thing. And hopefully telling his story does help others. But what you just wrapped it up with is something that I wrote down and I was thinking about. Don't simply go up and ask, what's your story? That's important to remember.
Mhm.
If they're willing to
Right.
share it, be willing to listen. Right.
Right. Exactly.
Don't like force it out of them. So yeah, man,
No.
powerful stuff, man. What do you think for you is your most favorite way to tell a story? Is it through one-on-one conversations? Is it from a stage? Is it through a social post? What's your favorite way to get that story out there for you? What's the platform?
Oh, an audience.
Yeah.
Absolutely an audience. I mean, there is such instant feedback, when you're in front of a group of people, and when you connect on an emotional level with everybody in the room, and you can see them all laughing, you can see them cheering, you can see them crying. Not that you go for that, it's not like, oh, I know what I want to do in this speech. I want everybody in the room crying. It's like you'd never do that.
Well,
but
sometimes
you have connection. You have instant connection, and you have instantaneous acknowledgement of whether or not you're actually getting through to these people. So that's what I really enjoy doing. My schedule is so busy. I can't imagine one-on-one conversations with people being a more effective way to get the story across. I enjoy that time, but if I'm a man on a mission, it's going to be to an audience of people. I absolutely love that.
It's funny because that's one of my favorite too, and I hear again and again how like the fear of speaking in front of an audience is greater than the fear of death for most people.
I know.
I'm like, no, man, I love it.
and I really, I'm kind of like just the opposite. I absolutely, I love it. I love it, especially when you connect. There's probably not a greater feeling of failure, and I've been there as well, especially in the early days of Honor Flight, where you come out of the room going, "Oh, that was a complete and total waste of time."
Right.
Yeah.
What do you do to learn from that? How do you battle that failure? I mean, we all have failures. What did Earl Morse do to overcome those?
It's all perspective.
Hmm.
There is no such thing as failure if you learn from it. And you learn from, okay, this isn't going to work next time. Okay, this is a very valuable tool. This is something that I can build upon. This is something that's going to make my presentation next time better. If I never, ever, either personally or professionally, or, certainly with On a Flight, look at any situation where, oh, that was a failure. Because if you look at it purely from a win-loss scenario, then yeah, that's truly a failure. But if you can learn from it, it's not a failure.
Great advice. Great perspective, to use perspective. I love it. So Earl, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, man. This has been enlightening. It's been fun to reconnect with Honor Flight. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Our time is nearly up. So I want to ask you this question. If somebody said to you tomorrow, you're all done telling stories, you can no longer do that to get your message out, to do whatever, what do you think would be your last story to go out on? How would that look for you?
This one, I'll try to get through this without getting too choked up. But it was a hot day. Probably we'd been into the program for about 4 or 5 months, and I'm greeting people at the World War II Memorial. We'd had a group come in from Cleveland, which was my home state of Ohio, and I'm shaking their hands, and I'm welcoming people to their memorial. And this one veteran comes in, he's in a wheelchair and he's on oxygen, and he's kind of choked up as he comes underneath the Pacific Arch, the entry into the World War II Memorial. And I noticed that he had a shirt on that said, he actually had a vest over his On a Flight shirt that said D-Day Survivor. And I got down on one knee and I said, "Wow, thank you for your service, sir. Where did you come ashore?" And he goes, "I was at Omaha Beach, 9:07 a.m. He goes, we were in the third wave. And my jaw just dropped, because everybody that came in on D-Day, they know exactly what time they hit the beach. Because then, time hack, they had to take this bridge or blow up that bridge. They had these various rally points and these objectives that had to be accomplished. When he told me exactly what time he came ashore, it's like this guy was there. And I said, it's such an honor to meet you, sir. And then he went off to another area, and I welcomed more veterans. Well, Dan, that was the same day that we had a lot of national and international coverage from Honor Flight. I think ABC was there and CBS was there, and also BBC had a film crew there. And when you have the major networks show up, good grief, that's an entourage. You got your videographer, you got your sound person, the lighting person, you've got the talent or the reporter, and then you had the director, on-scene director. And so it was the same response from all of these people who came up to me throughout the day. And the young ladies who were like the director or the on-site manager or whatever, they all had these Jacqueline Onassis sunglasses on, and they came up and they said, Earl, we're having a hard time. And I said, well, what's a hard time? And I could see through their big sunglasses, there were tears coming down their eyes. And she goes, we drove to these veterans and we asked them, we say, what does it mean to you to be here at your memorial? She goes, the veterans start crying, and then we all start crying. The film crew's crying. And I said, don't ask them, what does it mean to be here at the memorial? I said, you're not going to get a response because it's just too emotional. I said, ask them, where did they serve? Ask them what the food was like. Ask them, what branch of the military did they went. Don't ask them what it means to them personally to be here at the memorial. I said, look, you see that guy over there? He's in a wheelchair and he's on oxygen. Well, he came ashore on D-Day, and it just struck me. I had an epiphany while I was pointing to that guy in a wheelchair on oxygen. The epiphany was, this guy, he didn't have a prayer of ever seeing his memorial. It was never going to happen for him. Oxygen, wheelchair, are you kidding me? He was never going to see his memorial. And in my opinion, there was nobody more deserving to see their memorial. And I just paused there for a minute, and it hit me that this memorial was filled with veterans, some in wheelchairs, some on oxygen. It would have never happened. So, I directed the media to that person, and later I'd seen that he'd done some interviews, which was really, really heartwarming. But the greatest successes with Honor Flight is when you go there, and that World War II memorial is packed with World War II veterans, and Korean memorial, and it's packed with Korean veterans, and the Vietnam memorial packed with Vietnam veterans, and they're all wearing Honor Flight shirts.
Mm-hmm.
God, that's the greatest sensation. That's a greatest feeling, and that's since that's the greatest feeling that I get when I go to Washington D.C. That's the story behind that.
Beautiful story, my friend. I appreciate you sharing that. It has been.
Oh, Dan,
incredible.
I appreciate what you've done and what you continue to do. You're one of us, man. You've been there. You've done that. So it's like I'm talking to a brother here.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you for what you've done, Dan.
My honor and privilege, as you know, man. You're very welcome. Well, listen, I know that honorflightnetwork.org is where people can find information. Any place you want to direct people to connect with you, my friend?
Me personally, that would be founder at honorflight.org. Founder at honorflight.org.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, man. It's been an absolute incredible experience.
Oh, Dan, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Once again, thank you so much to Honor Flight Network co-founder Earl Morse. You can connect with him and Honor Flight at the links in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone. In fact, off script here, share it with someone who is a veteran or wants to serve veterans, because this honor flight mission is absolutely incredible. I personally was involved with a local hub here in Southwest Michigan for about 4.5 years, and it all depends on local connections. So please let veterans know that this exists. Find a local hub to get them to DC. This is just a huge thing. So there you go. But as far as the show itself goes, again, please go ahead and share it. Social media, stop someone on the street and tell them, do whatever you want to do. Just go ahead and share that. I really appreciate it. And if you want to share your story with me, go to storytellersnetwork.com, hit contact Dan on the contact page, send me an email, and let me know what you love or don't love about the show. Until next time, here's to telling our stories and having those stories to tell. Cheers. We'll just start a conversation, and I'll edit it together with my intro later and that kind of stuff. So if you're ready, I'm ready.
Yeah, unless you want to talk about the Ohio State Michigan football game. But no, we can skip right past that.
Lucky for you. I'm wearing my Red Wings shirt today because that's my team. The Wolverines,
okay.
Whatever.
Okay. Well, good. So the interview is going to go a lot easier. Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. But I mean, the bottom line is our team didn't show up. I think what happened was we sent the Lions in instead of the So, man, you guys brought it. I tell you what, the Ohio State brought it. So congratulations.
We'll see. We'll see what happens today. Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah. All right, cool.